The idea, preposterous. The plan, carve a national monument out of the solid black hills of South Dakota. The motivation, part tourism, part patriotism, part egotism. The result, a stunning monument to 4 American visionaries by a man as energetic and contentious as the country he loved. Now, sculpting Mount Rushmore, here on Modern Marvels. After 4 long years of fighting, World War I ended. In the 1920s, with the return of American troops, came a national exuberance, a joyous jazz spirit that seemed to encourage expansive, uninhibited behavior. After all, we had won a war. We could do anything. It was time to celebrate. We embraced great heroes and great hooligans. There were those who would legislate morality, and those who would throw caution to the wind to reach dizzying new heights. No one could predict the Great Depression, but it was only a few years away. American industry was retooling from the war economy to accommodate a rapidly growing consumer market. Mass production made new products available and affordable, particularly automobiles. Henry Ford was grinding them out at a rate of nearly 20,000 a year. The new American middle class was riding to work and turning the traditional family vacation into a great adventure on the road. The money-making potential of this was not lost on Joan Robinson, 67-year-old state historian and poet laureate of South Dakota. He longed to bring these people to the beauty of his state. But how do you convince tourists to drive for days on primitive highways to visit a forsaken corner of a largely undeveloped wilderness? Robinson claimed he had an illuminating flash, an inspiration to distinguish South Dakota with a roadside attraction so unique that tourists would be compelled to visit.
He thought what would be great is if they'd carve some Western folk heroes, Chief Red Cloud, Kit Carson, other folk heroes. If they could carve those in the Black Hills in the Needles district, that tourists would come for miles to see them.
The Needles are ancient stone structures, eroded stubs of granite mountains. There are literally thousands of them in the Black Hills. They're rough, uneven, impossible to carve. But that was not enough to deter Joan Robinson. All he really needed, he felt, was an artist who loved a challenge. That man was Gutzon Borglum, a renowned stone sculptor.
Gutzon was always looking for new worlds to conquer. Gutzon believed that he was the best artist who ever existed.
Borglum enjoyed working on an exaggerated scale. He once lamented there was no monument in America as big as the nation's spirit. He had done big work. He had designed a mountain carving in 1915 at a Georgia site called Stone Mountain. Now, South Dakota offered Borglum a new challenge.
The Rapid City Commercial Club had backed Robinson's concept, basically said to Borglum, hey, find a mountain, pick a subject, go to work. We want a mountain carving.
In 1925, with a frontier guide and his son Lincoln, Borglum explored the Black Hills for a carving site that would suggest a theme big enough for his bombastic reputation. He found both at Mount Rushmore, where he envisioned the ultimate American monument. Unlike the Needles, Mount Rushmore was solid granite. Even though the rock was riddled with minute cracks, Borglum became fixated on the site. Here is the place, he declared. American history shall march along that skyline. Then his men quickly scaled the peak and claimed the site as a national monument. He had no authority to do that, but that didn't stop him. It was here Gutzon Borglum would labor for the next 16 years before he would die trying to make his dream come true. He would revise his designs 9 times, move 500,000 tons of rock, and provoke some of the wildest political battles of the age. Like the America he loved, Gutzon Borglum came from hardy immigrant stock, Danish Mormons seeking the New Jerusalem in the barren wastes of Utah. Much of his early work glorified the female form, his female atlas and conception. As his work brought him recognition, he moved into the world of the rich and powerful and carefully cultivated extraordinary friends. The Wright brothers, he served as a timer on their early flights. He campaigned for his friend Teddy Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party. He wrote social and political tracts that provoked outrage, satisfying his appetite for confrontation. And in 1923, he even worked on a national committee trying to elect a Ku Klux Klan Grand Dragon to the White House.
He got into the Ku Klux Klan because he saw it as a grassroots movement. They were a national organization. They had hundreds of thousands of members. And so for him, he was not really part of some kind of lunatic fringe group. But he really thought that the Klan could be worked into an organization that would elect a president without the power bosses.
Borglum's crusades reflected his approach to art. He insisted on working in monumental scale and on mythic characters.
You were separated in those days by whether you did or did not do a Lincoln. All of the Lincoln artists were people on another level. It was the big leagues. He named his son Lincoln so he could write to committees and say, remember, Lincoln is one of mine. And he, of course, has done 3 of the best Lincolns, acknowledged the best Lincolns in existence. The one on Mount Rushmore, the seated Lincoln in Newark, New Jersey, and the Lincoln portrait that's in the Capitol building and on the grave in Springfield.
It was ironic then that his biggest commission was the one in 1915, the attempt to make the South rise again through a mammoth tribute to the Confederacy, Stone Mountain. Commissioned by the Daughters of the Confederacy, the work was designed to be as tall as a 20-story building. But the project soon fell apart. In typical fashion, Borglum had a volatile disagreement with his patrons who believed the artist was insulting the memory of General Lee by portraying him wearing a hat. In a fitful rage, he smashed his working models and fled Georgia with a lynch mob snapping at his heels. Borglum needed another project and fast to restore his reputation. His prayers were answered in 1925 when he received Doane Robinson's note suggesting the massive work in South Dakota.
The backers of Mount Rushmore were able to say to Borglum time and time again, remember, Gutzon, you can lose one mountain. You can't lose 2 without being historically a fool. You must prove yourself here. And he understood that.
A new mountain, a new dream, were what Borglum needed, and Mount Rushmore offered both. He quickly diminished Robinson's suggestion of Western heroes in stone and instead envisioned a tribute to American presidents who symbolized the evolution of the American spirit. Washington, father of the country who led the fight for American liberty. Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, whose vision of a growing nation inspired the Louisiana Purchase. Lincoln, the great emancipator who preserved the Union of States in its darkest hour. Teddy Roosevelt, the spirited individualist who defined the vibrant 20th century America and was an old friend of Borglum's. It would be 2 years before Borglum would carve the dream in granite. First, he needed money and a president to go along with the plan. America's jazz age fell under the leadership of a president whose deadpan expression and flat personality were a far cry from speakeasies and flappers. Calvin Coolidge, a man not known for a wild sense of humor. But in 1927, in an act of providence, he decided to vacation in South Dakota. Well, here was an opportunity. Borglum hoped to secure official federal recognition for his dream of Mount Rushmore and maybe raise desperately needed funds to finally get the project underway. To impress the president, South Dakota Governor William Bulow christened a hunting lodge, the Summer White House. A local stream was renamed Grace Coolidge Creek, and it was stocked with prize-winning trout and netted so the fish couldn't swim far from the presidential brook.
he hunted around and found some old Scandinavian with a big nose and employed him to sit on the bank of the Grace Coolidge Creek so that the fish would be accustomed to seeing a big-nosed person there and wouldn't be scared away when the Coolidge arrived.
Well, the effort paid off. Coolidge began to loosen up. He began to wear hats, all kinds of hats, and Borglum was able to infect a president with Mount Rushmore fever. On August 10, 1927, over 1,000 people showed up to catch a glimpse of Calvin Coolidge as he and the Secret Service arrived on horseback to mark the start of work on Mount Rushmore. At the ceremony, Coolidge declared, "We have come here to dedicate a cornerstone laid by the hand of the Almighty," and he handed Gutzon Borglum 6 ceremonial drill bits. Not to be upstaged by the president, Borglum immediately scaled the 6,000-foot peak and had himself lowered over the heads of the crowd to begin carving, even though he hadn't actually worked out the entire design yet. In Washington, as one of his last acts as president in 1929, Coolidge signed the Rushmore Bill establishing matching federal funds for private donations to the monument. To some critics, it was either the most visionary act of his presidency or a comic coda to the decade of decadence that preceded America's plummet into the Depression. Borglum's initial design featured only 3 figures, each rendered to mid-torso. His style was obsessively representational, relying on portraits, models, and life masks to capture every nuance of his subjects. He began his designs as rough miniatures, testing how they would respond to sunlight and shadow, then reworking those into 30-foot-tall structures which still were only 1/12 of what the finished work would be.
The model is made out of plaster, and it also is made out of excelsior, which was a packing material at that time. It has nails, it has pine needles, pine cones. It was made from just about anything that Borglum had on stock at the time.
Borglum designed the eyes of his subjects to feature raised areas in the pupils, suggesting a glint of light. In Lincoln's eye, this required a 30-inch shaft of granite. And he developed an almost impressionist style to render the spectacles that framed Roosevelt's face. In early films, Borglum describes the scope of the monument to Doane Robinson.
And that is 60 feet in height, from the wig to the chin. Borglum, how large will the pupil of that eye be? About 3 feet in diameter. The upper lid is 18 inches. The head, as I told you, is 60 feet in height. The forehead is 20 feet in height. The nose is 20 feet in height, and from the nose to the end of the chin is another 20 feet.
Even during the early stages, the effect was overwhelming.
People don't realize that this head and the first waist part is as tall as the Niagara Falls, and that Washington might sit in the Niagara Falls and the water would only break around his color.
Washington's head alone is as large as the Sphinx in Egypt. The carving size dwarfs almost all ancient wonders. To transfer the designs onto stone, Borglum used an ancient technique called pointing. A circular plate measured in degrees is placed on top of the model. The degree which a boom points is recorded, as well as the length of the boom out from the center of the plate, and how far down from the boom a string extends until it reaches an element of the design. These 3 measurements are multiplied by 12 and then duplicated on a larger pointing system on the mountain.
This was the model that was used. It was a 1 to 1/12 scale. If you look onto the model itself, there's a boom that comes out and then a plumb bob. So 1 inch on the model would represent 12 inches on the mountain itself.
Because of the high degree of accuracy needed, the pointer was the most important person on the mountain. In 1932, Borglum assigned his son Lincoln to that job, and from his vantage point, it was Lincoln who first recognized that the monument was quickly becoming more than just carving in stone. It came to me in an almost terrifying manner, Borglum admitted, that I had never sensed what I was planning. Its dimensions, the vastness that lay here, demanded the complete remodeling of the grouping I'd been dreaming. As work proceeded, Borglum constantly had to change his design due to inconsistencies in the granite. His first attempt at a Jefferson head on Washington's right side had to be blasted away and a new one built on Washington's left. Nature was participating in the design.
When you look at Mount Rushmore, you'll notice that the Jefferson head is tilted back or seems to be looking up at a higher angle than the rest of the heads. The romantic view of it is that Borglum saw Jefferson as a visionary, the person who saw where the country should go and knew how to take us there. Reality was that there was a crack that ran through Jefferson's nose, and he had to keep tilting it back until the crack no longer ran through the nose.
Borglum needed a specially constructed aerial tram to survey the work as it progressed and instruct the crew on how to approach refinements.
We would see Borglum come up in the bucket, and he'd stop the bucket out there in front with the wind kind of moving him around, and he'd look at either Lincoln or whichever one they had men working on. He'd just look at it, and then he'd go up and get some paint and a brush and go down and paint what he wanted. Nothing from here to 3 inches down to nothing. But then how he could make it come out looking like Lincoln and like Jefferson is amazing to me, because it was so large when you got next to it, you just couldn't imagine it.
It was an incredible challenge to envision the monument from such a close perspective, but Borglum knew the figures were there. It was just a matter of removing 500,000 tons of granite to reveal them. From the height of a 50-story building, workmen were carefully lowered by iron winches in special bosun chairs. Once the pointer verified a position, a workman used a pneumatic drill to create small holes for the dynamite. For just enough dynamite to remove extra rock to within 3 inches of the finished surface, yet not enough to damage the area to be hand-carved. In all, it was an exacting process, suggested to Borglum by European road builders who used the technique to blast holes in mountains to build tunnels through the Alps. The more delicate work was called honeycombing the rock. The surface of the stone was textured with a close formation of drill holes. Then smaller pieces of granite would be manually chipped off with a tool called the channel iron.
That's a channel iron. They use it in the regular jackhammer instead of a regular drill. And then they cut between the holes so that you can wedge out pieces of rock without using powder.
This channel iron, like the wide variety of steel drill bits used to shape the stone, was attached to a 60-pound jackhammer. It operated on compressed air piped up from the base of the mountain, 1,300 feet below.
And then the air would be funneled down into the jackhammer, which would make it go in and out. And then it would also, if I can lift it up here, the end has a hole in it, which would allow the air to come through and then push the excess dust away. But when you were in a bosun chair with about a 40-mile-an-hour wind and hanging on a cable off the side of the mountain, and it might be 20 degrees out, you had to hold that jackhammer away from your body. And as they held it away, it would, of course, wear them out.
There's a lot of crooked drill holes up there that...
Donald blames me for that.
But he couldn't drill straight.
Anytime you drill a crooked hole, you got to cut it out with a channel iron. You don't get out of working.
When they would use these jackhammers for any length of time, they would actually take their shoes and put them in the form of a V, and they would use that V to get the hole started. And they would go through a pair of shoes by not wearing out the bottom, but actually wearing the insteps out first.
Finally, pneumatic devices and hand tools were used to grind rough areas, then polish the finish to a smooth surface in a process called bumping.
This is a Dallet hand facer. It also was run with air. Air would come into the back. The 4-star drill bit was placed in the Dallet hand facer, but it wasn't locked in place. And the reason that he didn't lock it in place is because he didn't want it to drill a hole. All he wanted to do was bump the faces smooth. So this was used, and it just went around and bumped the faces smooth, just as though you would use sandpaper.
You had to be pretty strong to do that all day, because that's pretty heavy, especially for an old man like me.
When working so close to the enormous heads, it was difficult to have a sense of the finished design. So to help the men get the feel of the sculpture, Borglum had 5-foot models of each head placed on top of the mountain to be used as guides.
The workers talked about how big the faces were when you were right on the faces working up there. So he decided that what he would do was create these smaller, life-size models. Then he would take them and transfer them right up on the mountain, so the workers could actually feel the inside of the nose and underneath the eyes, and they can actually tell where they were working, and he could point out better, if you're going to go back this far, this is what you'll be doing, and this is what it'll look like when you're done.
We needed jobs. That was the main thing. I started out at 50 cents an hour, and at that time, we worked 6 days a week, and every 2 weeks we got a check for $52, and that was really good money. At that time, I was happy to get it.
At that time in South Dakota, unemployment was running at 34%. People needed the jobs, but experience in stone carving or hard rock mining were not necessary.
Actually, probably got the job because I was a good baseball player. Mr. Borglum's son, Lincoln, was a big baseball fan. So Lincoln thought, well, I'll hire baseball players and we'll have a baseball team up here.
The Mount Rushmore baseball team became a local institution. It went all the way to the state championship on several occasions. In fact, recruiting drillers and infielders was done simultaneously.
I played shortstop. That's the reason I got the job.
It was not surprising that these men would play well together on a team. They had a special bond, sharing the same demanding and dangerous task. What is surprising is that in the 14 years of construction, there were no critical accidents or deaths.
When you strapped yourself in one of those things and they dropped a boy down over that, he was pretty careful. I remember at that time, just an example, I smoked a pipe a lot at that time, and I had been silly enough to cut a hole in my respirator with a razor blade and had my pipe sticking through my respirator when Lincoln came up one time, and he saw me down there. He right away, he comes right down. He has a respirator in his pocket. He just went, of course, I didn't have the pipe when he come down because I see him coming. And he says, that'll be all of that.
In contrast to his imposing father, Lincoln Borglum seemed a silent partner on the project, yet he was most responsible for supervising progress and employee relations.
Mr. Borglum's son, Lincoln, he doesn't get any credit at all for the work he done, or at least very little. And Lincoln, and he was here all the time.
Quit college.
And he worked up there, and Mr. Borglum was gone a lot of times for 3-4 months at a time. And Lincoln actually supervised the work that was being done. And he doesn't get much credit at all, and I think he deserves a lot of credit.
Gutson was the exacting taskmaster. Lincoln would often smooth over the hurt feelings caused by his father.
We didn't get too much contact with Mr. Borglum. We all knew him, spoke to him, and so forth, but we didn't get close to him. He was very quick to make decisions, and he wanted everything perfect. There was a lot of people there that, I know one of the drillers that was a finished driller, been fired 5 or 6 times on the weekend, and then Lincoln would come back and get him on Monday morning, see? But he was different.
Gutson Borglum's reputation for confrontation had been firmly established before the Mount Rushmore project began. But with the onset of the Depression and the resulting shortage of funds, he found it ever harder to control his temper. In 1929, when the stock market crashed, so did the American spirit. the Great Depression quickly swept across the United States, entering a season of gloom. 12 million people were out of work. Bad times were of biblical proportions. Families were torn apart as men combed the nation for any kind of work at any rate of pay. And before long, dwindling resources caused work to become sporadic on Borglum's Mount Rushmore.
Gutzon could not understand how at Mount Rushmore anybody could tell him there isn't enough in the treasury for the next box of dynamite. He's carving stone that's going to be recognizable 100,000 years from now. How can you tell him today's production must stop? He could never understand the gift he was leaving for the world being related to dollars.
Funding for the monument was limited to nickels and dimes donated by school children and matched by the government. Major federal grant money was needed at a time when none was available, especially for such an odd and overwhelming project. But ironically, what had started as a tourist attraction in the wilds of South Dakota was becoming an important symbol of national pride in a period when pride was about all people had left.
Millions throughout the world envy us the privilege and right to call ourselves Americans. Let us prove our deep appreciation of that privilege by rededicating ourselves to true Americanism, with faith in God, faith in man, faith in liberty, and faith in America.
The Roosevelt administration's vigorous promotion of a revitalized sense of Americanism inspired Borglum with a new publicity strategy. It was clear that his relentless dedication to the project and the monument's reverence toward the democratic dream were perfect springboards for the patriotic government's support of Mount Rushmore, and Borglum knew it. Using his talent for self-promotion, Gutzon kicked off a series of theatrical dedications to mark each stage of the carving process and to keep the public and political eye focused on his dream.
America's gigantic Mount Rushmore Memorial is visited by President Roosevelt, who comes to dedicate the Jefferson figure. Sculptor Gutzon Borglum's daughter gives the signal.
That chap is planted just above what will finally be Jefferson's hand.
Egypt's pharaohs conceived nothing so spectacular as this enduring monument in South Dakota's Black Hills. The 65-foot Jefferson head alone is 3 times bigger than the Sphinx. The 4 immense heads, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt, when completed, will be the world's greatest patriotic memorial, America's heritage to future generations.
Borglum loved a big show, but his grandest publicity scheme was destined to strain friendships and cost him a powerful ally. He loved America and wanted to proclaim it in letters 20 feet tall. His original plan for Mount Rushmore included a giant timeline of American history. He called it the entablature. Calvin Coolidge had been selected to write the 500-word composition as a condition of federal funding in the 1929 Rushmore bill, which Coolidge himself had signed into law. In 1930, the ex-president sent a rough draft of the composition to South Dakota. Borglum promptly edited it to suit his own vision of American history, releasing it immediately to anxious reporters. Coolidge was shocked to see an altered version of his text published in newspapers. "This is not what I wrote," he told Borglum, "but it's what you meant to write," Borglum replied, and he began carving. The public was astonished at Borglum's audacity and the embarrassing tempest it inspired. It destroyed the friendship between the artist and Coolidge. They never spoke again, and the entablature project was halted by Congress until it accurately reflected Coolidge's composition. In 1934, after Coolidge had died and Congress was distracted, an ingenious newspaperman saw an opportunity to generate publicity and sell papers with a new twist on Borglum's entablature. William Randolph Hearst conspired with Borglum on a national promotion.
Who will write the epic of America? Here on Mount Rushmore, beside the colossal figures of Washington and other leaders, will be carved an eloquent summary of the nation's development. To this, the public is invited to contribute in a gigantic countrywide contest sponsored by the Hearst newspapers. Cash and other prizes go to the winners, whose combined text will be chiseled in the solid rock by Gutzon Borglum, famous sculptor. A mighty and permanent salute to the spirit of progress.
over 1 million people, historians and teachers and citizens and congressmen, all were writing histories for this problem and of finding a suitable text.
In these rare outtakes from the newsreel that was never released, Borglum awarded the winning student authors.
These 3 young men were awarded prizes in the successful competition, the successful national competition. These 3 young men were awarded, God damn it, you forgive me, brother.
I met the challenge and I wrote it the way I thought it should be, and I still believe what I read from others and the history of our country, that it did the best I could at the time.
In the end, however, Burkitt's words were never carved in stone. The idea had always been impractical. There wasn't enough stone for the full text.
Borglum envisioned an entablature where the Lincoln figure is today. And then when he had to move the Jefferson figure over to the left of Washington, he also had to move the Lincoln figure. So that took away where the entablature would have been.
Borglum was disappointed that the entablature fell through, but this wasn't to be the only unfinished dream on the mountain.
I think that we can perhaps meditate a little on those Americans 10,000 years from now, when the weathering of the face of Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln shall have proceeded to a depth of perhaps 1/10 of an inch. 10,000 years from now, I think we can meditate and wonder whether our descendants, because I think they'll still be here, what they will think about us. And let us hope that at least they will give us the benefit of the doubt, that they will believe that we have honestly striven in our day and generation to preserve for our descendants a decent land to live in and a decent form of government to operate under.
10,000 years from now, the faces of Mount Rushmore may still be there, but will anyone remember who these giants were or the people who honored them? Borglum tackled that problem by designing a hall of records to be drilled in the granite behind the heads to house copies of the Constitution, a history of the United States, and busts of 24 famous Americans. The plan was the hall would be carved behind Lincoln's head. There would be a tunnelway extending 100 feet into the stone, leading visitors into an enormous domed room that would house historic artifacts.
I would never have worked in there if I'd have starved to death. They were drilling dry. You couldn't recognize them when they come out till you blew them off. That dust, and it was terrible. It was a bad situation.
In many ways, carving the Hall of Records was more difficult than sculpting the portraits. Work on the Hall of Records ended quickly after Borglum's death in 1941. World War loomed, and Congress wanted the monument finished fast.
I believe that Mr. Borglum was a real visionary. He wanted no chance that this monument to America, to freedom and democracy, would be lost to our future generations. And he wanted to ensure that we had that record in a secure environment, and that was to be the Hall of Records. The original plans were to have a tunnelway into the mountain about 100 feet and then a very large domed out room. We have a tunnelway into the mountain of about 68 feet that was completed by the workers before work was halted. Well, I think the numbers were placed there by Guts and Borglum to indicate the depth at which drilling needed to occur. In this case, I'd say it looks like a depth of 12 inches was indicated, and then the blasting that would take it off to a cleaner level, consistent with the depth of the honeycombing. And then this blasted level had yet to be finally finished to get to the relatively smooth process we see on the faces or outside the Hall of Records. And in the Hall of Records, you can see the further in you go, the rougher or earlier on in that entire process that the workers were.
Because it wasn't finished, what is preserved illustrates the process of construction.
You do feel like you're very much standing on the doorstep of history at the Hall of Records, and part of the reason I think is because it is this unfinished dream concept that we see here.
the mountain and the man, their destinies linked, spirits melded as one. Overimposing, overstated, larger than life, both possessed of an inner grace, both grand representations of the American spirit. So it seemed beyond belief that one could exist without the other. Yet on March 6, 1941, Gutzon Borglum died at the age of 73. Without the chief to bully and boast, activity on the monument seemed to enter a state of suspended animation, incomplete, stuck in a moment of time between dreams and reality, between promise and power. Its full vision still frozen under countless tons of ageless granite. At the beginning of World War II, the United States had larger issues to consider. Gutzon's son Lincoln was commissioned to stop the work and clean up the site. Tools were disassembled, Borglum's models packed away, and Lincoln climbed the peak one last time to say goodbye to his father's dream.
The models which my father and I had made and changed so many times showed the figures were to be executed down to the waist. I felt they were just as effective the way they are today. On my final report to the commission, I stated that the granite stairway and the Hall of Records were essential to the memorial's completion. I felt that the memorial would become a riddle to people a few thousand years from now without explanatory data. Today, the official view is that the memorial is finished and there are definitely no plans for more carving. Actually, there is no stone on Rushmore for another face. I do feel that the great symbolic message of the memorial is there.
Many people wonder about should Mount Rushmore ever be completed. I think the answer to that is no. Certainly more work could have been done on it, but there's a story to be told in unfinished dreams, as well as finished dreams. It's a piece of art in its own right. You know, it's one man's conception of the birth and growth of our country, and what these four presidents represented to the first 150 years of our country. And changing or adding a head to Mount Rushmore now would be tantamount to, if you will, changing the smile on the Mona Lisa.
As a man grows old, so does a mountain. The Black Hills themselves are old men, granite stubs left from the erosion of stone giants tens of millions of years ago. Their erosion continues today.
The granite in the Black Hills is full of cracks, and the mountain itself has dozens. This is a natural crack. The primary thing we would do is to try to keep the moisture out of them, because the biggest concern we'd have is moisture getting in, freezing and thawing cycles, and then an actual wedging process whereby over many hundreds or thousands of years that wedging process could cause some problems.
While we know there's no imminent danger for the mountain itself, we do know that there's at least 3 cracks that pose future problems in the stability of the mountain. One of those cracks is in Lincoln's left eye, another is in Roosevelt's hairline, and another is in Washington's right ear.
This crack runs all the way through the left side of Washington's head and intersects with another crack coming in on a lateral plane. So we have a huge block of granite, and it's not going anywhere. It weighs many, many tons. We've been measuring the spread of this crack with 3 pins that are placed, and about every month or so somebody from our staff takes a measurement for the last 10 years, and we have had no detectable spread on this crack. The material that's patching this crack is the mixture that Gutzon Borglum used, which is the mixture of white lead, granite dust, and linseed oil. The substance that we've patched these cracks with most recently is a silicone-based, somewhat pliable substance that can expand and contract at this rate with the rock.
The eerie silence of the Black Hills draws seekers still. It raises questions that can't be answered. Is there such a thing as eternity? Or is forever a moment we hold in our hearts?
Carrie in 1933 when I was a little girl. We used to come up here. I lived in Hot Springs, and I'd come up here on Sundays or during the week, and Borglum would talk to us, and we watched Borglum carve those.
There used to be stairs that came in behind Abraham Lincoln, and you could walk up through there. They weren't restrictive like they are today, and you could get up on top of there when they weren't working.
And it was so amazing to me that anybody could actually carry out a dream like that.
The Mount Rushmore Visitor Center welcomes over 2.5 million tourists a year, some reliving a childhood experience, others on a patriotic pilgrimage.
As the public comes to the memorial and they walk out on the terrace for the first time, if they've never seen it, I think they first ask how it was done. But after they've stood there a while and thought about how, I think then they start to reflect on why. And the why is very important because it explains America and what makes America great.
Mount Rushmore is the work of a dreamer, inspired by a nation of dreamers. It was one man's vision, but it demanded the sweat and sacrifice of many ordinary men and women who would chisel their history in stone and celebrate the promise of the land they loved.
There was a group of people that turned to be a family that worked up here. And that was always amazing to me. They never got much credit. They got very little credit. When they took a picture of them, nobody even took time to name them. But I'll tell you, I would like to see them named, and so would some of their widows. Those old ones that died from working up here all those years with the dust in their lungs and that, somebody ought to name them.
(1869), the Transcontinental Railroad opens, and America begins her love affair with trains. The next 30 years will be an era of invention, expansion, and empire building. A period of great romance and deadly calamity. Now, the railroads that tamed the West on modern marvels. At the start of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln launched America's dream of connecting the country by rail. The first transcontinental railroad was the most ambitious engineering challenge of the 19th century. In 1863, the two railroad companies assigned to the task the Central Pacific building east from Sacramento, California, and the Union Pacific building west from Omaha, Nebraska, faced formidable obstacles building a 1,600-mile path through some of the most difficult terrain on Earth, including 2 mountain ranges and a vast desert wasteland. For 6 brutal years, an army of men accomplished some of the most spectacular engineering feats of the era. They chipped and blasted a half-mile tunnel with homemade nitroglycerin, erected enormous wooden trestles, laid tracks through the great western plains under threat of Indian attack. Hundreds of men were killed or injured on the job. When these rugged railroaders closed the tracks of the first transcontinental railroad at Promontory, Utah on May 10, 1869, they knew they had accomplished something wonderful, a national work that would last through the ages. But the challenge to tame the West was far from over. In fact, it had really only just begun. If the railroad was to survive, the owners would have to find a way of expanding it from just one thin line of steel to thousands and thousands of miles. Ahead lay dangers and challenges even they could not imagine. Five days after the joining of the two lines, regular train service began. What had taken 4 to 6 months by wagon now only took 7 days. The early journey west was a magic carpet ride to a mysterious and wild new world. The passengers experienced awesome new landscapes and wildlife. Antelope, prairie dogs, coyotes, and the last remaining buffalo. For many travelers, seeing the Rocky Mountains was a childhood dream come true. One man wrote, "My boyish dreams were realized. For hours at the school desk, I have pondered over the map and wandered in imagination with Lewis and Clark, the hunters and trappers and early immigrants. And here lay the first great range in the pureness of white, distant to be sure, but there it lay, enshrined in beauty." Railroad Traveler, 1871. Passengers would also see a rougher, more hostile landscape from their window, a wasteland littered with painful reminders of pioneers who had come before them. The early passengers quickly learned that even their own journey west was no smooth ride to paradise. Railroad travel was dangerous in the early years. Train wrecks and derailments were common, killing and injuring countless passengers and railroad men. Boilers blew up, bridges collapsed under the weight of trains, brittle iron tracks cracked, primitive brakes overheated and failed. The lack of a signal system sometimes caused two trains to be accidentally switched onto the same track and sent speeding into each other. The wood passenger cars seemed almost to self-destruct on impact.
Passengers could be crushed and thrown out. Windows would shatter because there was no safety plate glass in that day. Stoves would overturn, spilling hot coals through the crushed and broken wood, and instantly trains were set on fire. Cars would fall into rivers, off of bridges.
Weather was a major problem. In snowstorms, the train could be stranded for days in the middle of nowhere.
Often when we came to a stop, only the top of the stack of the front engine would be visible. All this time, the snow kept coming down day and night, until the only signs of a railroad across the range were the tops of the telegraph poles. Cy Warman, 1870.
Even in fair weather, the first transcontinental railroad running from Omaha, Nebraska to Sacramento, California had problems. In the race to build the line, there was naturally a long list of defects. Unsafe bridges, tunnels too narrow, roadbed not properly leveled, poor rail alignment, and carelessly laid cross ties. One government inspector declared it the worst railroad he had ever seen, but that didn't stop the railroaders. Railroad men risked life and limb on their job. Many would end up dead or permanently crippled. More than 6 times as many railroad men as passengers were killed or injured in accidents during the early days of the Transcontinental Railroad. Railroading ranked as one of America's most dangerous jobs.
Railroads didn't so much care about the safety aspects. They were concerned about the bottom line and the dollar and the profit. So the less they had to change, the better.
The pioneer Western railroaders were a courageous breed. They endured the hardships and dangers with a sense of pride. In the next 3 decades, their territory would expand out from Missouri to the Pacific Northwest, from above the Canadian border to below the Mexican. The engineer was the hero, revered along with the mythical cowboy or gunfighter of the West. He was assigned to an engine for years, and cared for it with pride. Often his life was on the line.
Many times, if he saw disaster pending, he would instruct his firemen to bail out, or as they used to say, take to the birds, we're going to crash. And he'd stay with his locomotive, trying his best to control it, and many times they were killed in crashes.
The fireman worked hard for his $2.40 a day. Early engines burned anywhere from 40 to 200 pounds of coal per mile. Sometimes a fireman might move more than 2 tons of coal in less than half an hour. One danger that was unique to Western railroading was buffalo.
The buffalo at that time were a problem. They would get on the tracks, preventing the train from progressing forward. You can imagine 1,000 buffalo on the tracks. On one occasion, the story goes that the buffalo had stopped this train. The engineer was incensed with those animals on the track, and so he took a shot at them. They stampeded and derailed the locomotive.
The railroad companies quickly realized that if the railroad was going to expand in the West, they needed to be faster and safer. Thousands of people rose to the challenge, but only a few would know success. As railroaders braved incredible dangers on the job, thousands of inventors from all walks of life were turning their attention to fixing the technology.
In the mid-19th century, you could think of the railroad industry as being a combination of the automobile industry, the computer industry, and the television industry of our day. So that's where the money was, that's where the inventors went, that's where men went to make their fortunes, to create this industrial empire.
The area of most intense interest was the inventions that made trains faster, more reliable, and safer. The coupler, the device that joined railroad cars together, attracted more inventors than any other railroad device. Whoever came up with the idea of how to make a safer and better coupler stood to make a fortune. One inventor tackling the problem was an ex-Confederate Civil War major who worked in a dry goods store in Alexandria, Virginia. In his free time, Eli Janey took pen to paper, searching for a solution. At that time, the standard method of coupling cars was the link and pin system. It called for the brakeman to stand between the two cars, and while one of the cars was in motion, he had to hold and guide the pin into the iron hoop of the links as they came together.
There was a split second of timing wherein you had to slip this into the pocket, hold it up, and drop the pin, and get your fingers extricated from that space before the car couplings literally touched. If that happened and your fingers weren't clear, no fingers. Sometimes no hands. If a slip and fall occurred, a man could be trapped in between the cars and gored, crushed, maimed, killed.
The technology was so dangerous that virtually every brakeman was maimed. Back then, a railroad foreman could size up an applicant by looking at his hands.
When the yardmaster or the trainmaster would ask the brakeman to see his hands, if he had all his digits, he was a greenhorn. If he had one missing, he had a little experience. If he had a couple missing, he was pretty good. But if he had all his fingers missing, they would make a signalman out of him or some job that he didn't have to use his hands.
One day, Eli Janey sketched out a simple design for a coupler. His idea was for a kind of knuckle coupler that brought the cars together like two hands grasping each other. A lever running outside the car operated it so brakemen would no longer have to stand between the cars. Janey's first patent, issued in April 1868, came to nothing, but he didn't give up. 5 years later, he patented an improved design that was sheer genius. The crucial advantage of Janey's new coupler was its ability to allow cars to easily couple, even when they were not at the exact same levels. But he didn't stop there. The practice at that time was for inventors to sell their new technology directly to railroad companies. They had to take their invention and actually go from railroad office to railroad office begging, pleading, advertising, and promoting.
The railroads were very conservative, and they were constantly looking for better inventions, better equipment, but they're also very careful about many of the harebrained schemes. What Janney was able to do, though, is demonstrate a workable, relatively inexpensive piece of metal that dramatically improved the safety of passenger trains at first.
At the same time Janney was perfecting his automatic coupler, another inventor was determined to overhaul the railroad's braking system. George Westinghouse grew up literally in his father's machine shop in Schenectady, New York, working with men who knew how to make things. Back then, the braking on trains was not done by the engineer in the cab, but by hand in a dangerous maneuver where one slip could cost the brakeman his life.
We had to ride out on top when the train was moving. That took nerve, coordination, timing, and a perfect sense of balance to go over the top of a freight train. Winter or summer, rain, snow, sleet, ice all over the roofs, and on brake wheels and handholds. Dick Nelson, 1871.
Here was one more way that brakemen could lose their lives. Not only were the handbrakes hard to reach, they were difficult to operate. Uneven braking could cause a train to separate. If brakes were applied too tightly, friction heated the wheels, causing them to slide dangerously along the track. Brakemen would be forced to make quick adjustments on several cars to keep the train from speeding out of control. George Westinghouse explored ways of improving the braking system by using compressed air. The idea of using air to somehow stop trains and control their speed had been around for decades.
There had been steam brakes, there had been very crude air brakes before that, but they were neither reliable nor did they really work together as a system. Westinghouse became aware of the use of compressed air to run drills in tunnels in Europe, long railroad tunnels, and thought that if they could run air through a rubber hose 5,000 feet in Europe to run a drill, well, by God, he could run air through a hose underneath a train and use it to stop the rolling motion.
Westinghouse's breakthrough for an automatic brake was that each car would carry its own reservoir of compressed air. The engineer with a valve in the cab could regulate the air pressure in a train line, which was a continuous pipe running the length of the train, connecting the air brake control valves on each car. By regulating the pressure in that train line, the engineer could apply and release all the brakes on that train simultaneously. Westinghouse built his first automatic air brake factory in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1875. Both Janney's automatic coupler and Westinghouse's air brake promised a far safer future for railroading, but in a cold financial calculation, both inventions were slow to be adopted by the railroad industry. It came down to dollars and cents.
The railroads could hire a brakeman for $1.50 a day. If that brakeman got hurt or killed, just about their only responsibility was to move the body off the tracks and send it home in a basket. It was cheaper, on the whole, for the railroads just to continue maiming and killing its employees than it was to actually invest millions of dollars in these new technologies.
Perhaps the strongest motivation for the railroad companies to install air brakes and automatic couplers was the public outcry. People were growing more outraged by the carnage on the rails. At last, in 1893, Congress passed the Railroad Safety Appliance Act that required the railroads to apply the air brakes, automatic couplers, and other safety features. It was a watershed piece of legislation and the beginning of the process of regulating industrial safety. In an ironic twist in history, this safety technology that the railroads feared would cost too much actually improved productivity and saved money. The automatic coupler made it possible to hitch up cars faster and without the need for human intervention in each coupling, while the air brakes permitted the railroads to operate longer and heavier trains far more reliably. While Janney and Westinghouse were worrying about safety, there was another man who dreamed of something far grander: luxury. In the 1870s, affluent East Coast types rented private railroad cars for hunting expeditions in the Wild West. This luxury would cost $300 per week. Jerome Marble, a Massachusetts manufacturer and sportsman, hired one of the earliest hunting cars for his family to camp on the Dakota Plains. The car came fully loaded with gun racks, dog kennels, and large ice boxes to preserve trophies of the hunt. The mobile hunting lodge was just one of the more extravagant innovations of a man who was determined to make his fortune on railroad passenger travel: George Mortimer Pullman. Like so many other great late 19th century men, George Pullman was from the Northeast. Born in Brockton, New York on March 3, 1831. As a young man, he headed to Chicago to seek his fortune. Even before ground was broken for the first transcontinental railroad, Pullman realized that long-distance travelers would need comfort to make the journey tolerable.
On one of his trips west from New York State, on his way to Chicago, George Pullman rented a sleeping car berth for the dollar it cost and climbed into it just to see how bad it was. And it was dark and cramped and small, and he thought it was atrocious. And legend has it that at that point he decided that was a way he could make his fortune.
His lifetime ambition was born: to replicate the elegance and comfort of first-class hotels on wheels. Other innovators experimented with sleepers, but Pullman was the one who came up with the idea of hinged upper berths that could be folded against the ceiling during the day, and the reclining seat could double as a bed. In 1864, he invested his entire savings of $20,000 to build the magnificent sleeper car he called the Pioneer. No expense was spared in the craftsmanship. Each Pullman sleeping car mirrored the ornate Victorian style that was sweeping America. By the time transcontinental travel became popular, George Pullman had the market for overnight luxury railroading sewn up. In the 1870s, he was leasing to the Western Lines his own fleet of cars, fully equipped and staffed. In 1870, the price of a first-class ticket between Omaha and Sacramento was $100, equivalent to over $3,000 today. Providing comfort was not the only problem that Pullman decided to tackle. People needed to eat. In the early years of transcontinental rail travel, passengers ate their meals during short stops at stations along the way.
We found the quality of the food on the whole bad. All three meals were almost identical: tea, buffalo steaks, antelope chops, sweet potatoes, and boiled Indian corn with hoe cakes and syrup ad nauseum. William Robertson, 1873.
One traveler, having dined happily on a delicious chicken stew for breakfast, was later upset to learn that he had eaten prairie dog. Pullman guessed that this was no way to attract the rich clientele he was aiming for. In 1868, he introduced the most elegant dining car of its day, named the Delmonico, after a famous restaurant owner in New York City. The Pullman staff turned out 12-course meals. Women were proud to have gained 5 to 10 pounds on a one-month round-trip journey aboard a hotel express.
The foods were the best of ducks and fowl: roast beef, roast ham, boiled ham, fresh potatoes, fresh baked breads, desserts made on board, even fresh Rocky Mountain trout when crossing over the Continental Divide, caught and delivered directly to the train.
Most of the cars even carried ice and could serve ice cream and exotic frozen desserts, which for people traveling across the desert in the late 19th century was nothing short of miraculous.
With first-class business booming, Pullman built cars for smoking, reading, listening to music, and lounging. The decor included etched and stained plate glass, plush seat cushions, marble and walnut washstands, damask curtains, and massive mirrors and frames of gilded walnut. The Pullman cars were a symbol of America's manufacturing supremacy, offering unrivaled elegance. But not all travelers were as enchanted with their journeys. The people with the roughest rides were the millions of third-class passengers who rode in cramped and stifling coaches known as immigrant cars. These trains earned their name for the role they played in America. Throughout the 19th and early 20th century, the railroad took the millions of immigrants pouring into the East Coast ports and distributed them out across the continent.
There was no other way we could have settled this land without the immigrants or without the railroads. Their problem, though, was that they needed to go cheaply. They didn't care about time, they weren't concerned with comfort, but they needed to get where they were going for a penny a mile, or even less.
As a young man, the Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson rode west in an immigrant train. In contrast to the elegance of Pullman cars, Stevenson's compartment was overcrowded, unsanitary, and positively bone-rattling. More fit for transporting cattle than people. Travelers sat on unpadded wooden benches for days on end. He wrote how the car was a long, narrow wooden box, like a flat-roofed Noah's Ark, with a stove at one end and a toilet on the other.
The benches are too short for anything but a young child. Where there is scarce elbow room for two to sit, there would not be space enough for one to lie. Robert Louis Stevenson.
The aspiring writer arrived in California after 10 bone-jarring days, sick as a dog, but immensely relieved. What enticed people to take the train west? The answer was a combination of opportunities and freedom, and the railroad company's shrewd promotional campaign. For the railroad to fully exploit its potential in the West, the railroad bosses needed to attract not just thousands, but millions of settlers. In the 2 decades following the opening of the first Pacific Line, dozens of other railroad companies stepped up to the plate to fully exploit the West. Everyone wanted to own a railroad that ended with the name Pacific. At stake were vast fortunes to be made from freight and passenger traffic. 4 major transcontinental railroads, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, the Southern Pacific, the Northern Pacific, and the Great Northern Railway would all chart new paths westward. Thousands of miles of shorter lines would be built to exploit the West's potential. The vast tracts of fertile soil, millions of acres of virgin forests, mineral deposits such as gold, silver, and copper. To encourage building, the government gave railroad companies land grants totaling over 155 million acres, with the right to sell it at a profit. In the mid and late 19th century, railroad executives engaged in an all-out battle with their competitors to expand their territory. Fighting on the front line of the battles were the survey teams, each one out there for their own railroad, trying to stake out their own route, the best route. Sometimes racing to stake a claim on the same mountain pass.
In Colorado, in New Mexico, throughout the Rockies, these survey teams would often tangle with each other. There was gunfire, there was intrigue in the night, men staking out routes by torchlight and bonfires, trying to get there before the other guy. And in that still relatively lawless area, just about anything went. The person who got there first with the most was the one who got the best route and probably won the game.
But winning the game depended on more than staking out the best route. The railroads needed settlers more than anything else.
The settlers were their customers. They were the passengers, they were the ones who shipped the wheat, who imported the machinery, who needed the fertilizer. If it wasn't for the settlers, not thousands but millions of them, the railroads would have had no reason for being.
the government paved the way for settlers with the Federal Homestead Act of 1862. American citizens and permanent immigrants could purchase 160 acres of public land for only $10 after 5 years of residence. In order to sell as much land as possible, railroad companies began competing for the immigrants. Railroad-sponsored posters, pamphlets, and books promised religious and political freedom, cheap, fertile land, and low-priced railroad tickets. The truth was often stretched or completely ignored. California, the cornucopia of the world, room for millions of immigrants and a climate for health and wealth. At the same time, the railroad sent hundreds of railroad pitchmen throughout the East Coast, Europe, and parts of Asia to recruit as many land-hungry settlers as possible. In the late 19th century, millions of men, women, and children from mainly Germany, Ireland, Italy, Scotland, Scandinavia, and Russia journeyed west by rail, bringing with them the dream of freedom and opportunity, and the hope for a better life. Of the 16.5 million immigrants who came to America during the second half of the 19th century, almost 11 million immigrants boarded trains to find their new homes. Joining the human wave were the legions of American citizens who wanted to relocate to the West. The population in the West skyrocketed. Railroad technology brought some of the fastest, most profound changes in human history. The Western railroads did not leave towns, they created them. People settled around where the railroad stations were built, and much of this pattern is still visible today. The town of Denver, Colorado grew because the railroads chose it as a junction point at the base of the Rockies. But hundreds of other western towns declined or died if the railroad bosses built their lines elsewhere. The settlement of the West, brought on by the railroad, radically transformed the land. Prairies were dug up to create farms for corn and wheat. Virgin forests were cut for new housing construction and lumber to build and run the railroad. All of this growth generated the real moneymaker for the Western railroads, freight transportation. The expansion of the Western Railroad's freight traffic revolutionized the way America did business. For the first time, wheat grown on farms in the Midwest could be shipped to the East Coast at a profit. Iron ore from Minnesota could be quickly shipped to the blast furnaces of Pittsburgh. When the first transcontinental railroad opened, freight was transported by boxcars and flat cars that hauled everything under the sun. Within a decade, refrigerated cars were invented. They were essentially boxcars insulated with cork and cooled with ice. Refrigerated cars allowed perishable goods to be transported across long distances without spoilage. One of the first left Baltimore, Maryland for California with a shipment of fresh Chesapeake Bay oysters.
In that insulated boxcar, they placed these 4 large hoghead barrels of oysters. And around the oysters, they packed ice. And they had stops along the route where they could pick up more ice and pack it tighter with ice as the ice melted. But that refrigerated cargo got to San Francisco within a week, and they say that the men were waiting for that, and they actually were almost auctioning off those oysters.
The advent of the refrigerator car allowed people to obtain fresh food further and further away from its source. Fresh vegetables from California or the far west could be transported to every part of the country at all times of the year, including the dead of winter. People's eating habits would be changed forever. The refrigerator car created markets worth fortunes. It gave rise to the meatpacking industry in Chicago, allowing for dressed and packed meats to now be transported to local stores throughout the country. This vast transportation network depended on maximum speed and efficiency and required something we take for granted today: standard time. In the 19th century, there was no uniform national time system. Most people lived their lives according to the sun and by the ebb and flow of the seasons. Noon was when the sun passed directly overhead, which resulted in a complex patchwork of time zones. When the railroads permitted rapid travel over the continent, the need for larger unified time zones became critical. Railroads needed to have precise scheduling where lines crossed and at stations where trains arrived and departed. Not having a standardized time system could actually cause accidents and just simply make operations inefficient. In 1883, the major American railroads held a convention and adopted what they called Railroad Standard Time, which divided the United States into 4 time zones. On an appointed day, all railroads in America switched their clocks to follow these new standard time zones. This completely revolutionized America's concept of time. In addition to train schedules, the railroads required extraordinary capital, more money than any other technology in the 19th century. The stakes were incredibly high.
The landscape of American business history is littered with the carcasses of railroads that seemed like they were a good idea at the time and failed, or schemes that promoters put together merely to skin the public and reap the profits and run. Ultimately, they began falling together into bigger and bigger systems as these companies consolidated into actually workable networks in the late 19th century.
One of the biggest networks to emerge began an ambition that would stop at nothing short of exploiting America's last untamed wilderness. One man knew the scent of money and a frontier in America that had not been exploited, the great northern expanse leading to the Pacific. James Jerome Hill set out to build what would become the last railroad empire of the 19th century, the Great Northern Railway. As a child growing up on a farm in Ontario, Canada, Jim Hill had lost an eye to a playmate's arrow, but few men looking westward had as clear a vision. His battles with rivals won him plenty of nicknames: Little Giant, Empire Builder, Oregon Bandit, Red River Pirate, and One-Eyed Old Son of a Bitch.
People who knew him remarked that he had a mind like a steel trap. He absorbed information, he loved facts, but more than that, he always had a vision. He set out to be a sailor as a young man, didn't get farther than the port of New York, and then headed west. Made it to St. Paul, which was then a tiny little village at the head of the Mississippi River navigation, and remained there the rest of his life.
In 1878, Jim Hill and 3 other men acquired the dilapidated St. Paul and Pacific and set their sights on the Pacific Northwest. They called their railroad the Great Northern and pushed west from St. Paul towards Seattle, building or acquiring track along the way.
Jim Hill was the ringleader and the guiding force behind it. But these 4 men built it largely with their own capital and money they were able to raise from private investors in the East. Their philosophy was to build well, build permanently, and build a lot of track.
Unlike other railroad bosses of the day who sat in their New York offices, Hill personally managed the project. Under his command, the Great Northern Railway made incredible progress. In one season alone, 1887, his army of 10,000 graders and bridge builders, along with 3,300 teams of horses, built across 640 miles of the North Dakota and Montana wilderness. The biggest obstacle was finding a pass through the Rocky Mountains. Hill was convinced there had to be a right pass there. To tackle the problem, Hill sent his brilliant young engineer, John F. Stevens. Stevens reached his goal on December the 11th, 1889, despite almost freezing to death. Maria's Pass, at an elevation of 5,215 feet, turned out to be the lowest point on the Continental Divide from Canada south almost to Mexico. Along his steel path, Hill created a sophisticated artery of feeder lines resembling tributaries of a river. Every few miles, a branch line left the Great Northern's main track to tap into a potential source of revenue. In time, he reached the Iron Range of Minnesota, the copper deposits of Butte, Montana, the forests of Washington. Thousands of Great Northern freight trains would haul these products toward the eastern markets. A cartoon poked fun of Hill's ambition. What it didn't capture was his drive for filling the land with people and jobs, the key to a railroad's success. He persuaded one friend in Boston to start an apple orchard in Washington. That ranch would eventually need 4.5 miles of Great Northern boxcars to ship its annual crop. Jim Hill encouraged a lumber baron from Minnesota to launch what would become the vast timber industry in the Northwest. Some of the most massive trees on the continent were chopped down. Great swatches of pristine forest were cut to clear right-of-ways for the railroad. On January 6, 1893, Jim Hill's Great Northern Railway was officially finished. After less than 15 years, Hill had built a railroad empire, 25,000 miles of tracks. Hill soon controlled 33.3% of all the railroad business in the West. With 5 transcontinental railroads now completed, the ceremonial striking of the Great Northern's last spike was a mere footnote in history. It was a bitterly cold and snowy afternoon in the Cascade Mountains. The workmen only reluctantly left the warmth of their cook shack to put on a show of celebration for the photographer. As for the empire builder who did most to bring it about, he was bedridden with rheumatism in the master bedroom of his new mansion in St. Paul. The completion of Hill's railroad symbolized the end of America's most ambitious building spree. But the impact of the Western railroads lived on, ushering in the modern era. The Chicago World's Fair in 1893 represented the zenith of 19th century American technology, marking the true end of the last century and the dawn of our modern era. Among those present were 3 of the greatest visionaries of the time. George Westinghouse, who invented the air brakes, was there. His electrical system lighted the fair, astounding millions of fairgoers with its brilliant glow. He spent his last years devising the alternating current technology that revolutionized America. George Pullman was there with his finest cars that epitomized the level of comfort, safety, and prestige that America had attained as a society. And Jim Hill was there with his Great Northern locomotives, representing the Western expansionism that the fair was celebrating. 5 transcontinental railroads and hundreds of feeder lines now laced the West. The 200,000 miles of steel had been a colossal feat, a testament to the power of technology and man's ambition to conquer the West. As the 19th century drew to a close, the pioneering iron horse was now America's first big business. A vast industrial complex manufactured steam locomotives, freight and passenger cars, and every other need to build and run a railroad. One major industry that grew up as a result of the railroad was America's steel industry. Before steel, railroads used expensive wrought iron for track building, but the railroad's demand for a strong, durable ally encouraged the growth of the steel industry in the 1870s and 1880s. One lasting legacy of the Western railroads is hard to believe. Ironically, after 3 decades of promoting Western expansionism, the railroads lobbied for conservation of many natural treasures that they had made accessible to the public for the first time.
They realized that they had opened a Pandora's box and that they were permitting the kind of despoliation, the kind of loss of this wonderful scenery, and that if they themselves didn't protect it, no one else would. And if they lost it, the nation lost it, the world lost it, it was gone forever.
In the years to come, the railroads played a major role in creating the national park system. The Grand Canyon, Yosemite, Yellowstone, and other great natural wonders. Their grandeur lives on today, long after the time the steam engine was replaced by diesel. Many of the tracks which ran across America are now collecting weeds and rust. Railroads still haul millions of tons of freight across the country, but for the few people who now make the journey by rail, the elegance and mystique have long vanished. Today, Pullman cars are a memory, eclipsed in the 1930s by the airplane. But they would enjoy one last moment of glory, carrying Harry Truman across America in his 1948 Whistle Stop campaign. The legacy of the thousands of men who worked in the West on the railroad lives on. Their names may be lost to time, but their sweat and sacrifice helped build a nation out of a wilderness. A land built on freedom, opportunity, dreams, and thousands of miles of steel rail. From the arid Nevada desert springs a glittering spectacle. It's medieval England. It's Caesar's Rome. It's ancient Egypt. It's New York City. It's 11 of the world's 12 largest hotels, gateways to the biggest playground in the world. Now, enter the fantasy in the desert. Las Vegas hotels are modern marvels.
In Las Vegas, form follows fantasy. And in all of these fantasy environments, you find ideas, emotions that tap into some very deep feelings of the mass market. There's a desire for a sense of meaning, of narrative, being able to put yourself into these different stories, whether it's pirates or ancient Egypt or South Sea Islands or the Old West.
The storytellers behind Las Vegas hotels have proved the truth of build it and they will come. Between 1990 and 1996, the city added 33,000 new hotel rooms, and an equal number of new visitors flocked to occupy them.
What other city in the world, from the moment you arrive, do you become part of a fantasy? We're the world's largest adult theme park, where you recognize you're going to come and for 3 to 5 days, you can be anywhere you want to be and anyone you choose to be.
Pirates unloading contraband on the dock! The scurvy cutthroats and the cheat that fly the Jolly Roger!
These buildings are not monuments. They sometimes are getting perceived as monuments, but they're not. We're going to change them. We are going to change these buildings. I mean, I have been doing this for 20 years, and even I have torn down things that I have built in that short of a career.
The fantasy that never stops began life as a way station in the timeless Nevada desert. Located on the rail line between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City, Las Vegas was established in 1903 as a sober working-class community to support the railroad. The tiny hamlet went about its quiet ways until government actions transformed the area. In 1931, gambling was legalized. The same year, construction began on the Boulder Dam, just 30 miles from the city limits. The dam, later renamed for Herbert Hoover, flooded the area with thousands of workers, eager for a place to spend their paychecks on Saturday nights.
The population expanded because of so many thousands of workers working on the dam, but also Las Vegas had never seen itself as a resort community. As so many hundreds of thousands of people came to see this huge, magnificent project going up, this was the time when Las Vegas first began to see itself as possibly a resort destination, so the dam played a very crucial role in that.
In the early years, what Las Vegas thought it had to sell was the Old West. The mythical American West featured saloons and gambling halls, and in Vegas one could find something close to the real thing. You could drink and carouse like an old-time cowboy, enjoying authentic liquor and a campy, tongue-in-cheek atmosphere. The big breakthrough came in 1941 with the opening of the El Rancho Hotel, a rambling ranch house. It transplanted the imagined splendor of the Old West to casinos and brought lavish decor and thematic architecture to the Strip.
A year later, the Last Frontier developed a couple of miles further out the Strip. Old-timers at the time were shaking their heads and saying Las Vegas is simply not large enough to accommodate 2 resort hotels.
But Vegas and its Western theme flourished. Over the next decade, gambling houses with evocative names like Hotel Apache and the Golden Nugget sprang up across the desert landscape. In 1951, the Casino Pioneer Club introduced a neon icon named Vegas Vic.
His arm was animated, and he had a cigarette in his mouth that kept flickering. And originally as well, his voice said, "Howdy, partner," a friendly, lanky cowboy type, which became, from the early 1950s on, the logo of Las Vegas.
While the Western theme sold well, California investor Billy Wilkerson dreamed of attracting a more sophisticated clientele to the desert. In 1945, he began construction on the Flamingo Hotel, only to run out of money before completing it. Mobster Bugsy Siegel stepped into the breach, buying the Flamingo and sparing no expense in making it the most modern, most luxurious destination in Vegas history. Here was a swank Hollywood nightclub transported to the Nevada desert.
The Flamingo had a special attraction. The Flamingo had a showroom, and it brought some serious name entertainment to Las Vegas. They became an attraction unto themselves. People came for the entertainment. I remember my first show that I ever saw in a nightclub was at the Flamingo, and I saw Lena Horne. And I was absolutely astounded.
Despite its star power, The Flamingo at first floundered under its then unheard-of $6 million construction costs. His mob patrons blamed Bugsy for the slow return on their investment. Just 7 months after his hotel opened, he was gunned down in his Hollywood home.
Bugsy was singularly unsuccessful until he died. And I think people came to Las Vegas to see what this guy had created, what had gotten him in so much trouble that his business associates had eliminated him.
The Flamingo's first owner had gone bust. Its second had spent other people's money with abandon and paid the price. Yet in time, their joint vision was vindicated as the Flamingo became a moneymaker and established a whole new style for Las Vegas. Attracted by plush surroundings and top entertainment, men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns came to gamble away their riches.
The sophistication of the Flamingo just broke open the market for Las Vegas. It was no longer just this Western dude ranch, easygoing sort of place. It upped the ante. It was a much more glamorous and sophisticated place.
Bold entrepreneurs and timely government projects had transformed the desert into an oasis. The glitter of ancient Rome would soon invite the wonderland to new heights of hedonism. With the success of the Flamingo Hotel, Las Vegas entered a golden age of expansion. Self-contained casino resorts sprang up as fast as they could be built. By the mid-1950s, Highway 91 in the middle of Nevada had become a glittering 3-mile tribute to hedonism.
What followed the Flamingo, one after another, were bigger and more hotels, more of everything. And they were all little mini oases.
Each new pleasure palace was determined to top the rest. In 1953, the Flamingo was forced to remodel to compete with the ultra-modern Sands Hotel. The casinos vied to attract top entertainers, and gambling revenue allowed them to lure talent like Frank Sinatra, with paychecks of $50,000 a week. One of the biggest draws was a series of atomic bomb tests conducted over the Las Vegas Proving Grounds.
Las Vegas learned how to use the nuclear bomb for publicity. They would have things like Miss Atomic Bomb contests. They would have mushroom hairdos. There was a contest for atomic cocktails. And even the hotels on the then emerging Las Vegas Strip would publish schedules of nuclear tests, would invite their guests to take box lunches up to the mountains, and in the pre-dawn hours they would be able to see the sky light up and those pretty mushroom clouds float away.
The entertainers, the atomic picnics, the resort amenities, all were merely devices to draw customers into casinos. Inside, then as now, there were no clocks, windows, or easily found exits, creating an air of unreality that treated gamblers like bouncing pinballs.
There tended to not be straight axes through casinos. You kind of had to wind your way through. You didn't know what was left, right, you barely knew what was up and down, because you could use mirrors every place to confuse you with that one. And you certainly didn't know whether it was night or day.
In the 1950s and 60s, Las Vegas was a completely car-oriented environment. One could drive the entire strip without spotting a pedestrian, and with nary a sidewalk, cars were used even to travel to a neighboring building. Hotel architecture adjusted to accommodate the car. providing ever flashier signs designed to be read from the highway.
In Las Vegas, they took the neon sign and they made it something completely unique, completely new. It was this image of the neon sign, which told you everything you needed to know about the building and why you should be there. It drew people in.
Built in 1958, the Stardust sign was 3 stories high, with lights bursting into a cosmic explosion that progressed through a 20-minute animation sequence.
A purely decorative piece of architecture, totally made out of light. The whole building created the illusion that it was just one big light show. It was like the modern kind of computerized extravaganzas and LED signs we see today at places like Times Square, way before its time.
In Las Vegas of the 1960s, builder Jay Sarno stood out as a showman and a visionary. He took the notion of thematic architecture and raised it to a new level with Caesar's Palace.
In 1966, when Caesar's Palace opened, they brought a special kind of magic. Caesar's had a very, very special quality to it. It had a theme, a real, honest-to-God theme.
Caesar's was actually a hodgepodge of Roman, Greek, Baroque, and even modern architecture. The building presented no particular period in time. It represented a mystique of casual elegance. From the swimming pool shaped like a Roman bath, to the heroic statues strewn about the casino, this was the most completely themed casino Las Vegas had ever seen.
Good design, good architecture, whatever it might be, is consistent. The more consistent it is, the easier it is to understand. You don't want the experience to be a cerebral experience. You want it just to happen. You don't want anybody to think about it. You want them just to enjoy it.
From the moment they walked in the door, guests at Caesar's enjoyed the feeling of being special. And they happily paid a premium for the experience.
Caesar's Palace, there's no apostrophe in there. It's plural, Caesar's. And Sarno explained this as everyone who comes there is a Caesar. He wasn't talking about any one Caesar who had this palace. Any visitor, any gambler who came to Caesar's Palace was the Caesar. This was theme architecture. It was creating an entire environment which would transport people to another time, another place.
While Sarno was busy constructing Caesar's, another maverick came to town. Billionaire Howard Hughes had a mission to rid Las Vegas of its shady underworld aura. From 1965 to 1970, he lived in the penthouse floor of the Desert Inn, going so far as to buy the hotel when they threatened to evict their eccentric tenant. Without ever emerging from his room, Hughes bought a series of casinos and threw his support behind the Corporate Gaming Act of 1969.
Prior to 1969, all owners of a hotel had to be licensed, and that would have been impossible with a broadly held company. After 1969, of course, corporations like Holiday Inn, MGM, Bally's, and so forth could provide enormous sums of money for the future development of Las Vegas.
Fueled by deep corporate pockets, Vegas turned to mega hotels, huge structures with thousands of rooms. These hotels were among the largest in the world. Their use as casinos only added to the difficulty of designing them.
They're buildings that operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That brings a whole nother multitude of problems that need to be dealt with in a facility that never sleeps, it never closes down. Unique design problems for the 21st century.
Caesar's impresario Jay Sarno had shown the limitless potential of hotel theming. Howard Hughes had cleared the way for corporate America to invade the world of gambling. Backed by imagination and money, Vegas hotels were poised to reach for the sky. Howard Hughes left Las Vegas for good in 1970, leaving behind a legacy of corporate money. In his wake, international hotel chains moved in, erecting larger versions of their typical buildings.
It changed the atmosphere of Las Vegas. You didn't have these individual crazy entrepreneurs with a vision who were able to force through something like Caesar's Palace, who were able to force through by their own will something like the Flamingo Hotel.
High-rises began dominating the Strip, dwarfing and replacing the great neon signs that had defined Las Vegas. A single hotel casino might service 3,000 guests, along with nearly as many support staff, demanding a vast infrastructure.
You have to take into consideration the fact that there has to be a huge amount of redundancy. So you never rely on one water source. You never rely on one power source. Things that are at the heart, the energy that the building requires for its physical demands, are engineered in a completely different way because of this factor of never closing the building down. I mean, that is the mortal sin, never to close the building.
Las Vegas's new corporate masters soon realized that size meant little without a storyline behind it. The way to a customer's heart and his wallet was to create the best costume party around and ask him to join the fun.
What we do in Las Vegas is that we put you on stage. We invite you to come onto our stage. What we'd like to inject into the whole thing is romance. The way romance makes us feel, we never get tired of. So if we can incorporate romance into something, then I will have you back and back many, many times and enjoying yourself and feeling wonderful about yourself.
For the last 20 years, Las Vegas architects have faced a daunting challenge: to make their hotels bigger than the rest, to imbue them with a consistent and involving theme, and to build them fast. With so much money at stake and constant pressure to relieve a fickle public of their hard-earned dollars, these steel giants leap skyward with astonishing speed.
If we were to wait until we actually had the end product designed, these buildings would be taking 4 and 5 years to build instead of 2 and 3 years to build. So what we've had to do is we've had to go after a more universal structure. By universal structures, I mean spaces that have far less columns in them, buildings that have much higher ceilings in them, which give designers much more flexibility as to how they're going to arrange the non-structural or non-bearing walls inside the movie set. I mean, that's what these are. These are not historical buildings. People will not be coming here 2,000 years from now and looking at these buildings. This is one large movie set that continually evolves and continually changes.
Suddenly, in 1978, Las Vegas faced its worst nightmare when Atlantic City, New Jersey legalized gambling. In the years since, gambling has spread to scores of reservations, riverboats, and localities. Contrary to original fears, the competition has actually benefited Las Vegas.
As it has grown over the years, Las Vegas has become the place to come. It's the Mecca for gamblers. There are so many other things going on around the country, but basically all that does is whet the appetites for people to come to the Mecca.
The original MGM Grand, opened in 1972, was both quasi-film set and brassy evocation of 1920s movie palaces. Presenting grandeur with a popular flair, it offered children the magic of movies and adults the nostalgia of a bygone era. Anticipating huge crowds, the MGM architects turned a dilemma into an opportunity, designing a massive porte-cochere, an outdoor awning capable of covering scores of limousines. At once decorative and functional, the porte-cochere created the grand entrance, an elegant ceremony presided over by costumed doormen.
This started a trend. You'll see in a succession of hotels after that, each porte-cochere got larger, more glamorous, more glitzy throughout the 1970s.
In 1980, tragedy struck when a deadly fire swept through the MGM Grand, killing 84 people. During the blaze, some gamblers on hot streaks refused to leave the football field-sized casino and were finally herded out just minutes before advancing flames consumed its 1,000 slot machines. Today, high-tech monitoring systems make Las Vegas safety procedures among the most stringent in the world. And there is much to monitor. A lone mega-hotel consumes 15 million gallons of water and 7 million kilowatts of electricity each month, enough to service over 3,000 homes. Technology helps also to safeguard the profit margin as eye-in-the-sky cameras capture the play at gaming tables. Pictures of every table are flashed to a giant control center, where they're examined 24 hours a day. Anyone on a hot streak gets a closer look and has his photo preserved for future reference. With an even greater concentration of huge hotels, Las Vegas has gradually become an urban environment. In the town where car was king, people now walk between competing attractions.
The hotels have literally put their front doors right out on the edge of their property with some kind of big moving sidewalk, like into the Mirage or into Caesar's Palace, that scoops you up right at the very edge of the sidewalk and whisks you into the casino. The funny thing about that is, of course, that those moving sidewalks only work one direction. It isn't like in an airport where you can take a moving sideway going both directions. In Vegas, you can only go in. You're on your own getting out.
Whether on foot or in a car, visitors to the Strip frequently find themselves trapped with mobs of fellow fun seekers.
Personally, I think gridlock is good. I think gridlock is part of the reason people come to Las Vegas. They love to be with other people. This is Times Square almost every night of the year.
Like Times Square, in recent years, Las Vegas hotels have decided to clean up their act. Beginning with Circus Circus in 1975, they have actively pursued the family market. Gone are most of the semi-nude dancing girls. In are the arcades and the animal acts. In the grand tradition of Las Vegas entrepreneurs, the transition from adult fantasyland to family resort was spearheaded by one man.
Steve Wynn had a vision that Las Vegas could be something more than just casinos with hotel rooms. He showed the industry that they had only just begun to grow. He was the catalyst that began the building boom, where every casino had a new and bigger and better idea on how to entertain our tourist population.
In 1977, Vegas pioneer Steve Wynn bought the old Golden Nugget Casino. He promptly added his first hotel wing, threw in a dash of salesmanship, and revived it as a money-making operation. Quiet beginning to what became a very loud empire.
Steve Wynn is probably the most demanding client I've ever had. He's also the best client I ever had. He's willing to put some money up, and he supports everyone on the design team. And he's pushing all the time and always, always looking for a better way.
To create the Mirage Hotel in the late 1980s, Wynn raised a then unheard of $700 million. He was building the most costly hotel in Las Vegas history and gambling on selling a new concept.
With the opening of the Mirage, Las Vegas took an entirely different direction, where it wasn't just about gambling. It was about each hotel being an attraction in and of itself.
Wynn envisioned the Mirage as a South Seas paradise, an irresistible tropical playground sprung from the Nevada desert. With the Mirage, Wynn promised a complete environmental experience to dwarf even Caesar's Palace. Rather than simply a pleasant backdrop to gaming, this thematic design was its own form of entertainment. Wynn boldly presented his new kind of casino by building the first major street-side attraction in town, a 40-foot erupting volcano.
The volcano at the Mirage was a challenge that Steve Wynn put on the table, and that was to say that not even Walt Disney has attempted a volcano yet. And that was our mandate. He wanted to see a volcano that, in fact, everyone would believe it was a real volcano.
This volcano had to erupt safely and spectacularly every hour, regulating the amount of natural gas and triggering it with an electronic ignition made the explosion controllable. Attention to detail included scenting the blast with a pina colada aroma that was both pleasant and suggestive of the South Seas.
What was hard was lighting it. That's what was hard, because you have the light, number one, from the explosion, but in between the explosions, the lighting effect on the tumbling water and on the stonework, that was by far the most challenging thing.
For much of the Mirage decor, Wynn and his design team went with the theory that God is the best architect. Bring in real tropical landscaping. Believing also that nature can always be improved upon, they lit the trees with artificial yet romantic glow.
When you see these beautiful, growing, living things lit so sexy, so subtle, so wonderful, that's when the imagination begins to happen, and that's when architecture is at its highest point.
For the Mirage high-rise, one of nature's most precision elements would be used to create a glittering facade. Each of its 3,000 rooms look out through glass containing 24-karat gold.
Real gold glass doesn't turn green when the blue sky is reflected off of it. The gold glass is made from copper. When the sun or the sky is reflected off of it, look green. We didn't want the building to be green. We want it to be gold.
In 1993, Wynn unveiled a larger-than-life version of every boy's fantasy, Treasure Island Hotel and Casino. Here, the sidewalk attraction was Buccaneer Bay, a Disney-esque pirate village that the pirates of old would have built if they could have afforded it. Every 90 minutes each night, a full-scale theatrical presentation plays out in the bay. Audiences find themselves right in the thick of the action as pirates battle a British frigate.
When I'm in Davy Jones' locker, not before. As you wish, sir. Let her go.
While Steve Wynn was busy transforming Las Vegas into his version of Disneyland, others began to realize a hidden secret behind the Magic Kingdom.
If you really look at Disneyland, Disneyland is a shopping center. People plan vacations around going to a shopping center. Meaning that if you really take a second look at Disneyland, it is full of retail and it is full of food and beverage.
Eager to match Disneyland's success, Las Vegas hotels have vastly expanded their shopping facilities. The Forum shops at Caesar's Palace lead the new trend, offering an array of upscale shops tied together by the setting, a mock Roman street. The lighting speeds through a 24-hour cycle every 3 hours, subtly heightening the excitement. Freely mixing ancient tales and modern technology, the Euromall features a statue of Bacchus that leaps to life in full animatronic splendor. And in this emporium, lack of tradition is a virtue. Gambling for dad, shopping for mom, dolphins for the kids. By the 1990s, Las Vegas had nearly perfected the family resort. In 1993, Steve Wynn tore down the dunes to make way for his newest hotel. The pirate ship at Treasure Island fired a simulated cannonball across town to the dunes, where the famed sign and hotel were timed to implode with the cannon blast. It was a unique show and a spectacular symbol of out with the old, in with the new. Wynn's innovations have opened the floodgates to bold new ideas, and the next generation of hotels would meld form and fantasy as never before. Modern Las Vegas is the #1 resort destination in the country and the mecca for serious gamblers. Casinos still vie for the business of high rollers, the super rich who think nothing of losing $1 million in a weekend. The ornate Pompeii suite at Caesar's Palace lists at $7,500 a night, but invariably is given gratis to high rollers. They lounge about the 4-bedroom duplex amid Baroque columns, gilded tapestries, and Italian frescoes.
Everything that we design, we put a storyline to it. Whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a shopping center, whether it's a casino, we create a storyline. So we have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Each storyline is complemented by the latest technology. Racing to provide customers with the hottest new thrills, hotels are constantly upgrading their attractions to boost sensory stimulation.
Sound systems that are in the casinos and in the restaurants are extremely complex. They're as complex as what you might find in any good movie studio. And we actually have departments and divisions of people who look at sound for these different environments on a continual basis.
In recent years, the best show in town has become the buildings themselves. 1990 brought the 4,000-room Excalibur, an Arthurian extravaganza complete with moat, drawbridge, and fire-breathing dragon. In 1993, the new MGM Grand opened its doors, immediately becoming the largest hotel on Earth. Perhaps the most distinctive building in town is the Luxor Hotel, an ultra-modern take on ancient Egypt. Its 30 stories and 26,783 glass plates shimmer in the desert sun. Standing guard in front is a new kind of sign, a giant sphinx scaled 50% larger than the original. Inside, its atrium takes up 29 million cubic feet, making it the largest in the world. Even going to one's room is an adventure, with elevators that rise at an angle of 39 degrees to match proportions devised long ago by Egyptian architects. At night, the pyramid performs a vanishing act.
It's like a black hole in the middle of the strip. Everything else is lights and waving all these megawatts at you to get your attention, and suddenly there's this totally negative thing, this big black object that's almost invisible at night.
The Luxor is topped by the brightest beacon in the world, 40 billion candle power of light shooting into the night sky. Ironically, since light is only visible when it hits something, and the desert air is especially clean, this super searchlight does little but cause havoc for pilots flying overhead. The latest leap in Las Vegas architecture is recreating actual modern cities. The Hotel Casino New York, New York takes a place well known to millions, transporting its physical presence and bustling atmosphere in startling detail.
The difficulty in creating this project overall was the fact that you didn't want it to come off in a cartoonish fashion. You wanted the details to be so substantial and so real that people could identify with the project. And in New York City, inside and outside.
The giant facade collected a dozen of the Big Apple's most famed towers, recreating them at 1/3 scale. The Las Vegas version of the Empire State Building stretches 47 stories high, enough to make it the tallest structure in the city.
The idea that it was a very large project didn't really hit us until we found out that between this project and the one next door, we had consumed all of the number 11 reinforcing bars and 14 reinforcing bars in the country. Now that's a lot of steel, considering that these are largely concrete projects.
New York, New York is monumental architecture, and perhaps the biggest piece of pop art in the world. It draws people into a unique environment, surrounding them with Art Deco details of New York in the 1920s.
People from New York really like it, which is so wonderful. And to have those people come here and be happy with it and enjoy it. We've created everything except the smells and the muggings and all the litter around. We've tried to eliminate as much of that as possible.
In some ways, this fantasy New York has surpassed the original. Each year, 3 million people cross the 300-foot Brooklyn Bridge that leads to its entrance. Approximately 20 times the number that walk the span between Brooklyn and Manhattan. In New York, citizens avoid Central Park at night for fear of robbery. In the Central Park that overgrows the casino, patrons eagerly line up for the chance to be relieved of their money. New York, New York is the largest expression of the world's greatest theme park. A city with the dollars, the imagination, and the whimsy to try anything.
Las Vegas is a city built by people who dream big dreams. Entrepreneurs who aren't afraid to take a risk. I even look back when they first built the Mirage, and those of us in the business community were all saying, oh, how are you ever going to meet the debt on a $700 million property? Today, they're building billion plus. They're building suites that in and of themselves are $17 million to build. It's a city that every idea becomes a stepping stone to a grander idea. It's a city where entrepreneurs are not afraid to gamble on building a bigger, brighter future.